Good evening, everybody. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to every single one of you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules tonight to come sit and have some really sobering conversations with us tonight. This is the first of many this is the first of many mixes that we're going to be having, and it's from Brand Power Play as well as the Sobering podcast. The purpose of these I keep on saying podcasts because of you, Frat, and because we sponsor the Sobering podcast, so I keep on saying podcast. But the purpose of this mixes really is to get like-minded people into one room to have conversations where we can interact, ask the right questions that hopefully are going to shift and move culture forward. Tonight, the discussion is going to be on everything music. We're going to be talking about the evolution of the South African music industry in light of 30 years of democracy. We're going to have a conversation of where we come from, where we're at. We're going to have a conversation around, the profession of music. And then we're also going to be having conversations around what does the future of the South African music industry actually look like. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panel members who are here tonight. Thank you guys once again for taking time out of your schedules to be here. Thank you for coming here to impart your knowledge and to speak about your guys' shared experiences in terms of everything that you guys have been through working in the South African music industry. My name is Sebenzile Ngobo, and I am the Regional Marketing Manager on Brand Power Play. I would like to introduce the amazing team who helped put these mixes together tonight. A special shout out to Anatu, who works on my team. A special shout out to Lebo Khotadi, who's from 2704 Creative House. And a special shout out to Kabelo Fratpacker Muremi, who is from the Sobering podcast and will be facilitating tonight's discussion. With that being said, please enjoy the evening. I hope you guys enjoy the conversation. But with that being said, I'm going to hand over to you, Fred.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you so much to you, Sebs. Thank you, Sebenzile. Thank you, Mpati. And thank you to everybody that made time to come through to the Sober Play mixes. And a big shout out to Big Wara. Big shout out to Quito. I mean, this is something that we've been talking about and something that we also speak about on the podcast as well in terms of how do we extend the conversation of music as a profession or the creative industry as a profession as well. And I would like to also extend a big thank you to our panelists today. I mean, these guys, they've got extensive knowledge. They've practiced in the field. They've got all of the battle scars, all of the victories, the triumphs, the tribulations. And it's actually an honor to be on this platform with these people. Shout out to you, Miss Cosmo. Thank you for being here. Shout out to you, Refiloe. Shout out to you, Bugalav. Shout out to you, JR. And I think everybody understands the weight that all of these names on the stage hold. And I think we just want to give them a nice welcome with a round of applause. I think they do deserve that, yeah. All right, so kicking it off, I think Sebs did set the tone pretty well in terms of how we looked at this and how this was themed in terms of this is 30 years of democracy. And we understand how music has played a pivotal role in either comforting or communicating or, sharing a message amongst the people. And I think we just like to understand in your context, how do you feel that music has played a role in democracy as it stands? I think I'll start it off with the OG, Refiloe.
Actually, today, this is the OG. But I think where Kabelo and I are somewhat fortunate is that we are that generation of people or that year of life where we spent exactly half of our life in apartheid South Africa at the time, or at least the formative years of our life in apartheid South Africa. And we're in matric in 1994. Jeez, I say it like that, and I realize time has gone. And when you think through just how the sound, how music was a fabric of every step of the chapter. Like, I think pre-94, I think Township Bubblegum, I think about the themes. I think about how music was subversive. It was very political, but couldn't say things. Like a Chico song would say, "We miss you, Manelo," which was a song around Mandela. We miss you, Mandela. But because of censorship, things like that couldn't be said. And you think about the Stimela catalog, and you think about all of these guys and the music that was being, it was very much around a litmus and an indicator of kind of the rising tension in South Africa at the time. And then you think around, like the first time at least I heard Vuvuzela, I think it was like 92, 93, the Arthur version of that. And then I think to like 94, 95, and how Kwaito starts to come into our consciousness. And I think about how Kwaito becomes a language for young kids, very much in the same way that SA hip-hop at one stage did, and how piano is very much a language of the youth of that time, of their time. And I think about how music has helped give a voice to these various people across this time frame, their various voices, you know, and you can define epochs in our freedom through the music that you can talk to, you know. So yeah, music very much is a part of this journey. Music is very much a part of the healing, and the healing we still need to do as a country. So yeah, I don't know, Kabza, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, good evening, everybody. We have the privilege of being alive at that time. It really is a privilege. Because I think we were the first generation to be able to have permission to sit much like you are sitting this evening. It was not a reality, and we were the first. We have the privilege of being part of it was almost like a combustion of music, of culture, of politics, of racism. I mean, think of all of those tensions. It was like just such a moment that was so tense, and we harnessed that to make music. We were the first, you know, generation to give a voice to a young black person. You know, I know I'm a pastor, but it feels like we were that generation that gave the voice to the young black person to give, you know, a middle finger to the establishment. And it felt good. It felt really, really good. We were born for such a time as that. You know, we were too hood for the burbs, and we were too burbs for the hood. And what a privilege. It's such a privilege to have been alive at that time. You know, as you were asking your questions, and I mean, we're going to touch on a lot of things, but I look at where the film industry is today. I look at where the fashion industry is today. It's all because of the permission that was granted by us expressing ourselves. Music, being part of that combustion, as I said, of music, gave birth to the fashion industry, gave birth to the film industry. When I think of like the film projects that were done back in the days compared to now, when I think of the fashion, I mean, Ineleng from Botswana was one of our first fashion designers. If you go back to like the first one or two first TKZ videos, all the stuff that we were wearing on the videos, that was like a local fashion designer expressing herself as a fashion designer. So what a privilege to have been, I'd say, part of the collective midwife that brought this thing forward. You know, it was a beautiful thing.
Sheesh. Man said collective midwife.
It is though.
But now, you know, Refiloe mentioned something so important about Kwaito being the voice of the youth. Then, you know, it gave a voice to a lot of us. I mean, my first experience as well with music was actually a Arthur Mafokate tape. You know what I mean? The bus song, and I could sing along to it, but I had no context of that because I'm 6 years old or 7 at the time.
Hey, pass.
Yeah.
Pass. Don't call me Kafue. That was revolutionary, man.
And looking back at it now, it was revolutionary. But I think here it's a privilege because we here the panelists have the privilege of being a fan of that art at the time. You know, we were the recipients of that, and you guys were the architects of that sound at the time. You know, so I think I'd just also like to ask JR and Cosmo as well in terms of if we're looking at Kwaito and how it made us feel at the time. Do you think that we have done our job in preserving that culture of Kwaito now?
Noni, do you want to go first?
You hate me. These guys are conspiring against me, just by the way. All right, so unlike my OGs here, I was in grade 1 in 1994. You were matriculating. So the time difference is completely, you know, quite vast. But it's not to say that I didn't interact with Kwaito at the time, because obviously it was a very big genre at the time. But I think for me, my memories of how it impacted my growth was also just how everybody was so passionate about what they were doing and the messages that were coming through with Kwaito. And I think when you're having a conversation about preservation, it's also just looking at how things are evolving throughout time, and how people still borrow from Kwaito even in 2024. Amapiano is Kwaito just with a different beat, if you're really honest, you know? And I think for me, it was great to kind of grow up at a time where I'm getting to see the evolution of all of these things, because I grew up in a very hip-hop centric time because that's what I was exposed to. So, but for me, it was like, okay, I'm liking this. It's got different sounds, it's got different vibes, but in South Africa, they're doing this other Kwaito thing, so it's more local. And that's actually what made me fall in love with local hip-hop, is the combination of what's happening in America, what's happening in South Africa, but something more palatable for someone like me, where Kwaito kind of felt a little like, okay, I get you guys, but I'm in the north now. Thanks, Mandela. What are we listening to? So I needed like a little bit of a collaboration for the two, and that's where local hip-hop kind of sparked my joy and my love. And for me, the song that made me fall in love with local hip-hop was actually Double HP with How You Feel, because I was a big Biggie fan. And for me, I was like, yo, who's this guy who looks like Biggie, but he's rapping, you know, Kasitswana. So for me, that preservation for me was great to kind of grow up and kind of see how it's evolving over time. Whether we're keeping it preserved for Kwaito, like I said, I think you're seeing pockets of it in different spaces.
And I think that's a very important point, you know, just to add to what she's saying. I don't think we should be precious about Kwaito per se. Kwaito was but part, it's a moment in time. It has to morph. It has to become something else. We grew up with Ujile Pesha, Kitty. You know, we grew up with bubblegum. We grew up with Nobody say Salome Umita Pikoko. Brenda Fassie. We grew up with Dr. Rebecca Malope singing bubblegum music.
Dan
before before she became a gospel artist. So by the time we came, we took what was that, we made it what it was, and you have to allow it to move. So I don't think we should be precious about, and this whole thing, Kwaito is dead. It's not about the music. It's about allowing the music to morph and become what it becomes. And that's what it's become today, you know?
Yeah, I guess you guys have summed it up. Thanks.
That's good.
I was, no, I was actually, I'm surprised, like, when you were speaking about transition from apartheid times to freedom, how when we looked at music, we didn't see one of the most important tools that was used to actually communicate unity at that time, which was peace in our land, right? Which was a mechanic used at the time to create an environment of social cohesion within South Africa to ease into a new transition. Just to show the importance of what music is, just to circle back to that point. But I think in terms of like significance of the eras, especially where you're coming from, we can't speak about the impact of Kwaito in an era without speaking about longevity, right? So that for me is one thing that I want to give it, I want to tip my hat to yourselves, stalwarts of the movement. Because it's one thing to have a Brenda Fassie, a Dan Chanda, a bubblegum singing Rebecca Malope at the time, who it's easy to transition and say, we're going to do bubblegum for 2 years, right? And then after 2 years, we're going to then morph, and then we're going to then move into this thing, right? Because there's a 2-year change between genres. I'm talking about people who started making Kwaito in the early 90s and had to carry the torch throughout the entire decade until another genre came in to help accelerate. These are not 2-year stints. So when we speak about bubblegum, I guess we have to call it what it is, because it is bubblegum, right? It's here today, gone tomorrow. It's very chewy, it's very poppy. That's the significance of what it is. But I have to tip my hat off to the Kwaito era in the sense that carrying a torch from 1991 or 92 all the way to Jabba's, let's say, 1999 introduction, which I think it was, if it wasn't, maybe 2001. That's a whole carrying of 10 years of a decade of creating the sound that's gonna eventually, hip-hop is going to catch up with and say, phew, hey guys, we're tired of carrying you guys on our backs. At least now you hip-hop guys can do your thing. So I want to speak also about longevity and sustainability, because not only is that how we build great genres, but that's also how we build great businesses, right? It's also how we build great corporations. It's all about longevity, sustainability. How much are we putting in to these things for how long, and how much are we investing into these things before we can actually reap? So I got to give it up for that, really.
That's beautiful. That's amazing. Now, in terms of that era, right, we were seeing things in a sense of everything was so tangible, you know? Cassettes, you know, CDs, posters, that age, you know? What are some of those learnings that you guys still keep to this day in terms of the hard copy age into the age that we are in now from a digital perspective?
Refiloe, maybe you could, because you're a big like hard copy vinyl guy and whatever, right? So maybe there is some sort of significance there for you.
Okay. The reality of the matter is the objective is still the same. What do I mean by that? You are an artist coming into a space. You are in a war for attention, and you're in a war for hearts and minds. That's fundamentally what you're doing as an artist. You need to build a community and a tribe of super fans. That's fundamentally what you're doing. That's, I mean, what's the data point now? I think this is almost 18 months old. The people in the label can update me now. But Jan 2023, when there's a specific report that comes out on an annual basis. It talked about the number of ISRC codes that come out or are issued per day. And it came out at around 115,000 songs are being released every day. Every day. And that was in January 2023. By the middle of last year, I think it had accelerated to somewhere around 225,000 and is probably closer to around the 350,000 mark now, every day. You will need to stand out. And how you stand out is fundamentally by being able to build a connection with a tribe of people who are going to resonate with your artistry. The only thing that's changed is the medium. Now people zone in, they discover your music differently. They don't necessarily buy it, and yes, there might be an argument that it's commoditized, but fundamentally, Kabza the Small is Kabza the Small because you choose Kabza the Small amongst another 100 different people who likely are just as talented, but because of one or two differences in terms of their approach, in terms of building a community, you don't know about them. So the physical age was fundamentally really focused, I think, very much, like at least from a label perspective, it was less so a track business and more an artist development business. So A&R in the truest sense of the word. So a TKZ needed to be built. And for a TKZ to be built, there are very deliberate, intentional things you need to do over time to make sure that you've built a brand that can actually then run over time, right? You need to make sure that you have, as a label or however you set up as a team of people, however you'd set yourself up, you need to make sure that you've got a team that's going to radio all the time, making sure that that was a discovery tool at that time. That's maybe a big difference now, in that radio plays a bit of less of a role, but you needed to make sure that you were doing that promo. You needed to make sure that you were going and doing a traditional media run, making sure that you are able to do all of those elements there. You needed to make sure that you perfect your live show. And that live show, when you engage with people on a one-on-one basis, when you're on a stage, you leave people wanting to know more about this artist. What was nice about the keepsakes, such as a physical, is that people would buy your music up front and they'd need to make a choice because they'd have to pay X number of rands. And they would then go, it would be like a badge. I mess with TKZ. I've got a TKZ album. I'm going to read these lyrics. I want to know everything there is to know about this artist. And I argue to you that, if anything, especially with the amount and the frequency and the volume of music that's coming out, it gets harder to be able to keep people's attention spans. Attention spans that I think statistically now are 6 seconds long. If you don't catch somebody on socials within 6 seconds, they're not paying attention anymore. You need to be able to harness that attention and keep it. And that really is, as I say, fundamentally still the same battle about the hearts and minds of people.
Well said, well said. Thank you for that, Refiloe. Now, JR, I think you've gone in both spaces. I mean, you've released on hard copy, and you were very present and active in the streaming and digital era. What are your juxtaposing feelings about both spaces?
Let me think. So yes, I've had the pleasure of being hard copy artist and digital artist. I remember actually the label I was actually signed to, that I did my first release through, Electro Mode. They were the first to actually get an Apple license to upload. And the main event, the JR album, was actually the first hip-hop album to actually make it onto iTunes at that time. And so, I had sat with Chris at the time, the late Chris Galakis, who was the MD, and we had spoken about like, yo, man, we need to get into Apple Music, we need to find a way. And they had been doing some business and stuff in LA, and eventually he said, okay, fine, let's look at this Apple thing, because that's kind of where the world was going. But in my head, I remember sitting with him in his office, and I said to him one thing that I continued to tell to a lot of people after that. I said, the game is changing. And a lot of things in the world, especially where music is related, is going to be about accessibility over ownership, right? And the novelty of actually possessing something is going to wear off. We're going to see it translate over and over into other sectors. We see it now with fast fashion, for instance, where your Zara's can have dope items. You know, this week, different item next week. It's not made for repeat wear, right? It's in today, you're feeling it, you're wearing it, the trend changed, we're gone. If we could, we'd rather just have access to that wardrobe just to look cool without having to actually buy and retain the stuff and then let the stuff go back. And that's what was going on with music. And the ability to see that now translated into, it's going to go from people actually loving having an album or a vinyl or whatever and just wanting access to it. And that became Apple Music, Spotify, and everything. But also, it was going to be about like how quickly we can be able to serve what Refiloe has then deemed a short attention span. So then we started looking at high frequency of release, for instance. So instead of releasing one album every 2 years, which was what I was doing, I would put out one album, do 15,000 copies, I'd be fine, you know? I'd be like, oh, 20,000 yana, you know, I know, nka relax yana, got 2 years, you know, and just take a break. Now you don't have that luxury, right? High frequency of release, 3-4 albums a year. You know, it's very important. So the frequency of work doesn't stop, but then the reward doesn't equate to the amount of work being put in to release the product. Now, you ask yourself, as a creator of music, how fair that is, right? You're spending 10,000 hours, not in your life, but a year to make product. And the product doesn't even equate to what guys were making back in when TKZ was charging 50 G's a show in 1998, you know? The standard is still 50 G's a show in 2024. So yes, you know, so if you're asking me about the better, I think back then, and when I say back then, I don't mean in Kabelo's time. I mean, I'm 37 years old, so I'm not speaking in like old people terms. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry guys, you know. These are my friends, by the way, so I can say stuff.
Who
like
looks
that.
older?
Oh. Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to delete those songs, those files. So, you know, so when I take a look at it, I think there was much more pride in making art for the artist back then. I remember when I made Cool Forever, the album, we made a die-cut album, which was like made of like cardboard, and we had to print the cardboard in Japan, and then we had to ship it into South Africa, and it had embossed and raised thing engraved in it with cutouts, and it had a PPD price of, I think, you know, 69 Rand or 78 Rand. No, it was like about 78, 79 Rand at the time, which was very expensive.
People don't know PPD anymore.
Oh, okay. Which was a price per distributor at the time. So Musica and all of the CD warehouses would buy at a rate from the label, and they would add their markups to the product, and that would be their profits. So the labels would then get what would then be deemed the PPD price at 59 Rand, which was a standard at that time for me. But we had a PPD price of 79 to 89 Rand on that album, which then pushed us into an international pricing. So not 99 Rand or 89 Rand, it pushed us to 120. And I remember Chris Galakis saying to me, Jeepers, we're not going to make any money from this fucking thing. Sorry, you know? And he said, we're going to lose so much money on this thing. And I said, look, for me, it's about having a great product, you know, and having my fans buy it and touch it and say, wow, there's effort here. It's not a plastic sleeve. It's paper. It's, you know, embossed. It's all of those things. So there was much more, you know, the novelty was more, you know, real for me back then. Right now, not as much. But I believe that there has to be other ancillary parts for artists. Social media, you have to be out there. You have to have the scandals. You have to have this, you have to have that, because that's what's going to actually help sell the hype to be able to promote the music.
Look, I think that analog era, at least for me, because I have the privilege of having been around for almost 30 years, there's certain soft skills you learn. Yeah. Like there's a work ethic that was built into me because I'm having to move around the whole country and visit, 50 radio stations, right? There was one point where I went independent, and I was putting, in fact, the first TKZ album, I put up personally. I put up the posters in that Auckland Park bowl. I put them up personally. And when I look at kind of what's going on today, as much as the fundamentals are the same, you're fighting for attention, you've got to be seen, and you've got to do what you need to be. You got to do what you need to do to be seen. And then there's also the high infiltration rate of music and whatever else. But soft skills like work ethic, the discipline. I come into studio sessions today, and I'm like, okay, when the studio session started at 12, for us, we were billed from 12 o'clock, right? So you were there at 12, okay? And when you were in studio, like, we got work done. Whether we were high on weed, or we were drinking, or we got work done. We were churning out albums like every day, all day. Straight 10 years, album every year. So I think there's something about the analog piece that instills discipline and work ethic, because you had to go, you had to do. If you didn't go, because right now I can record an album at my home. I can I can design a cover, which are all great soft skills. But from the comfort of my home, right? I can design a cover, I can do all of those things. I can get my music distributed from the comfort of my home. There's this personal touch where you actually have to work with people. And I'm seeing that fall short like lately. Emotional intelligence, just courtesy. If you're not going to make it, give me a call. I'm not asking for red carpet treatment or to be treated specially. It's like, if I knew that I wasn't going to make the session next week, I'm not going to make it. Okay, cool, because things happen, right? But now, because there's just this, like, there's no emotional intelligence, there's no discipline, there's no common courtesy, because there's no interaction. We interacting a lot with machines, and that cold face of people, and actually having to go have a relationship with a compiler, a relationship. You know, like, you actually know who's putting your music. When your music is playing all over the airways, there's a face to that person. Right now, you bang. Who are those people behind Apple Music? You don't know. You don't need to say anything to anyone. But there's something that analog period taught. And I'm hardwired like that. Like, those disciplines are still with me. And if there's anything I can change, I love the fact that the fundamentals are still the same, but kind of those soft skills, like the discipline, even studio etiquette, like working around the studio. You know, when you ask somebody, please automate at the end there. It's like, what man, automate? You know, it's like, because we had to deal with the hardware, the actual, if you go back to our studios, they were stacked. You had like modules. So you actually had to learn the modules. Or you were in proximity to people who were learning the modules. So you actually then learned how the programs work, how to communicate, because I'm dumbfounded, because it becomes difficult for me to work with cats today, because there's a certain jargon in any industry that it has to be kind of used to be able to communicate what you want. And if we don't have that, like, how are we going to make music? You know, so look, there's ways around, you know, I've found a way around, you know, but I'm just saying, like, that analog piece forced you to engage with people, with machines, with you know, the road, the brass tacks issues of the music business. And I think that's missing now.
Sorry, before you jump in, just to remind you one thing that TK from TS Records used to say. So TK Ngiza was Spu's partner. And that was something we took on board. He said hits are made on the road, not in the studio. So fundamentally, and if you think about how, like, I carried that across even into the hip-hop area and how, like, Tswada was made. I remember dragging Kuli, kicking and screaming to every radio station in the country. because hits were made on the road, my friend. They were not made in the studio. So that discipline that he talks to, just to
I
echo
can argue and say the biggest acts today in the country, with the pervasiveness of the social media and all the great stuff that they're doing online, if they added the analog piece, the success would be 10x. They're leaving money on the table. It's like, actually go and see, like, yes, your music is reaching Putadichab, Palabur. It's reaching there. Go see those people. Go see those people. And the thing is, the privilege now is by the time you get there, we had the issue of the distribution piece, the hard copies getting there. You can have a packed out musica, but if the stock didn't arrive, you're dead in the water. You're going to have to come back. Now, the digital vibes get the music to the people. Go see those people. Like, go there, because those are your people, right? Those are our people. But the people are leaving that on the table. They're not doing that.
It's also crazy how I think you guys are obviously looking at it from an artist perspective, because obviously that's your experience. But I think for me as a DJ, also as a radio presenter, trying to see or experiencing the differences of the older models, the hardware, going into a more digital space. I remember once we once had to revamp the studios, and we couldn't operate from upstairs at the SABC. And you guys will know those underground studios are the worst things in the world, because everything there was made before apartheid. So it was a very crazy, 2 months that we were down there, because technically upstairs in the studios, everything is digital. So you could easily just grab a song from the computer and say, okay, cool, we're rocking this song now, we're jamming it. I could even download it on my computer and play at the same time. But being down there was so mind-blowing for me, because everything is so, if it's not a cassette, it's not playing. If it's not a CD, it's not playing. And it was so wild for me to actually go down there and learn how things have actually evolved from when you guys had to do those radio runs. It wasn't as easy, because you can't just say, hey, Kabelo's here, do we have the cassette? If it's not there, it's not playing. Whereas you could easily send it to me in studio and I could be like, okay, let's do this quick. Or if I want to prepare a show and I've got somebody in studio, maybe I needed to play and they want to do an exclusive drop, I could play it immediately. So I think from that perspective, that's also quite special for me. Even as a DJ, where learning on vinyls, you had to physically go to a vinyl store and source them. And you literally had to go. That's why those guys, when they say carry your bags to the gigs, it's because they had 2 luggage bags going to every single gig, trying to get themselves through. Now we just literally have a USB. You plug it in, you play. And I think the skill of that is also something that you need to appreciate, because you had to learn and hone it and get into the work. And like you're saying, the work ethic of constantly understanding, how do you play the music? What mediums do I need to have? How do I stay adapted to what's actually happening right now? Now, I can easily download a song on my phone, plug it into my USB, and play at the same time, which is wild for me. But I think it's crazy to kind of see how music kind of progresses from that perspective. Even if you're looking at how music is streamed now, where before you would buy a CD, have the pamphlet on the inside. That was my favorite part about buying a CD, is I would then be able to either read the lyrics and then read Kabelo's message on the bottom, say, oh, this one's for my girlfriend, what that. That was my favorite part about buying CDs, because you get a personal touch of the artist even though you don't get to meet them personally. Now it's just an upload. I get so annoyed when artists upload music on Apple Music and the lyrics aren't there, because that was my favorite part, singing along. Because I used to be the cassette girl, writing it down, pause, play, pause, play, pause. I had a book. So for me, that's still my journey that I want to continue with when it comes to experiencing music, you know?
Yeah, big truth. I mean, now looking at it, right? Like we are in this space of it's digital, and a lot of things that are happening from a musician perspective, I'm sure would probably also trickle down into the music practitioner's perspective as well. You know, what are some of the changes that you've seen in terms of even working personnel within the ecosystem of music? Like, for example, you mentioned A&Ring and how intentional it was to break an artist or build an artist, right? But now we're hearing things such as artist development being a thing of the past. Like, what is your take on such things, and how do you think we evolve from that?
My brother, you lost me at now that we are.
I need him to repeat the question, please.
You can't.
No. I'm joking. I hope so. So I think, you know what? We have to bring in, my statement is we have to bring in old practices into the new age. I've embraced where we are. Like, digitally, I have, right?
Yeah.
I've got a tech business, I've got this, I've embraced it fully. So I understand what the changes are. But it's also a hybrid model of the old and the new, right? The old learnings and also where we are currently to be able to build models for the future. That's what we need to look at. So future vesting is a real thing, right? Where you'll be 5 years from now is a result of what you're doing today. So where you are today is a result of what you did 5 years ago. So that's the way of the world. So when we look at like A&Ring and all of those things and artist development, those are things that were lost because labels, a lot of labels today are looking for what is readily available because there isn't enough money in the economy for any independent label to still be building artists, right? So I could go to Universal Music or Sony Music or Warner, whichever other major, and back in the day, and I could say, I've got this artist, we're gonna do this kind of deal, and then they say, let's put them on an 18-month development plan or whatever, which I think Refiloe also needs to just add on to that because he's got the vast knowledge ability of both major, independent, and management as well. Then there would be that kind of money that would be then allowed to do something of that nature. But because we're really investing our own capital into this, it's a different story, right? So how do we maximize on profits and returns without wasting the time developing the product? That's what we need to realize. So we need to, and I implore this on every single artist, musician, like independent, whether or not you're running your own business, like record label or management business, or I see JR there, photography business, design, whatever, fashion label. Is that like, how do we manage to deal with where the climate of the world is, but make it work for us, right? Because we've never had it work for us in that way. Because it's always worked for the system. It's always worked for bigger places where there've always been a larger cash injection, and therefore we know what the returns are gonna be at this high interest rate of 70%, you know, and it's actually essentially a loan. Now you're putting your own money into it. So I believe we need to bring in those old practices to be able to develop models for the future without losing where we are. So bring in back the artist development. Give yourself time to make music. Because the reason there's 380,000 songs released a day is because 97% of them are trash. The barriers to access are very low right now because of all of these things. You understand? We are, what do we say? We are where? We're at the bottom. You understand? When it comes to that. So we need to bring back, like Kabelo says, quality control. Assess yourself. This song is not good enough. You know, you build your team around you, whatever, and you know, it's not good enough, it won't make the cut, it won't, because even if it does, it costs money to go to DistroKid, it costs money to do all of those things, use Fives on whatever, you know, it's gonna cost you. So you're gonna keep burning through that. Unless you say, is it good enough? No, it's not, let's skip it. That's something that is gone, that needs to be implemented again. Also, something of like a producer, a record producer, which is something that is lost. Like Refiloe said, you need to build a TKZ. You know, so people were surprised to hear like, oh, Destiny's Child, were they not friends or something like that? You know what I'm, how? Because in everybody's books, like the groups are friends, like Squatter Camp. We grew up together, you know, whatever. But in most cases, it's like the label sits and says, oh, we need to build a group with a girl, 2 rappers, and, you know, it's like, oh, how, you know, and then they build it together, and then that group has success for 30 years, you know? And that's where we need to go back to. And you see that. And J.D. Rockefeller, you know, it's not, I don't know if he's the right example to use, but, and I'll wrap it up here, who was the first director of the FBI, said that... J. Edgar Hoover, ne? Yeah. Who was J.D. Rockefeller again?
Rockefeller is the richest man in the world.
No, J.
Richest man, yeah.
J. Edgar Hoover. Yeah. He said, a friendship found on business is a better deal than a business found on friendship, right? And the reason for that is that you will share the same basis for a lot of things because you will understand that the fundamentals of it have a solid foundation. If re hutse kaofela ra go vale re di busa ra decide re thoma business ya dikipa wena o nya go ja business ya dikipa o rekele bana di champagne nna ya ga kenya go ira kae rolwa because I understand you. But if we know we're building the business from scratch and this is where we are, over 10 years we built such a solid friendship, right? Because the base is the same. And I think that's what artists need, like going forward, is that let's stop this thing of bringing our boys, and say, come manage me. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's the truth. Let's stop those things. And I know, Fred, that's where you are. You know, I know. No, go ahead, Ref.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting question. Like, okay, so maybe let's start with kind of so-called the major labels, right? You've got investor pressure. Investor pressure talks to a financial year cycle, right? That's a 12-month cycle. It's not good enough to talk about that in this particular year, we've got X number of incubation artists and we don't have any breakout hits. So there's going to be preponderance, as he mentions, on that which will be able to deliver results to shareholders and interested parties in the short term. Here's the problem. TKZ's first album was an album called Take It Easy. It sold 600 copies. In today's climate, as a label executive, after he had done that, would have been to deprioritize it. I wouldn't have had the runway to be able to incubate and work that artist and go, if we change X, this variable or that variable, we could perhaps turn this. I would leave him to the wolves and he'd need to bring me something that actually might resonate for me to reprioritize it. That's just the reality. No, it's no shade on anybody. It just is the nature of what it is we do. Because what they're looking at is a set of metrics. And I've looked at those set of metrics when I ran Sony and when I ran the Universal local business. It is what it is. You're 4% behind, you're 10% behind. What are you doing to turn this around? You only have this much A&R money. Somebody like Her, for example. Her, Epic, she signed to Epic, no? Or is it Epic or it is Epic or is it RCA? I'm not too sure. One of those Sony labels. They found her when she was 16 years old. She didn't release a song until midway through her 18th birthday. They were just perfecting the sound. That's all they were doing. So there's that short-term pressure. That's the first thing to consider. Over time, when you've got a fairly developed ecosystem, as when we kind of built it out around the time of when it was peak physical, and in more developed markets, you've got small to medium labels, size labels, that will do the hard yards in terms of finding talent, developing it to a point, and then a label will step in and say, you know what, Asha, we like Justin Bieber. We would like to get into the Justin Bieber business with you or buy you out of this artist. And then the labels would be able to take it from there as well. I think that with the streaming era, what happened, especially, I'll talk specifically locally to South Africa, is there's a number of businesses that might have struggled to adapt from a model where you're getting a lot of upfront money by way of physical sales. And as a consequence of that, you had a ecosystem where you went from having Galawas and 999s and whatever else who were able to feed the system and have artists that were ready-made superstars be able to come out on the other side. And as a consequence of that, what you have is, again, too much pressure for a label to find, or major labels to find and develop artists, which is not their model at this particular point in time. So there's an ecosystem issue as well. And I think it talks to that JR thing. If you're not making, call it, you get a gold record and you're going to make 2 power or whatever it is from that, which you can reinvest. You're not going to invest. You're going to be in the track business. That's probably the smartest way to be able to do this. So you're going to be looking for songs that are impacting as opposed to artists that are impacting. So I think with the indie labels, you're seeing a lot more of it being a track business. You also have your, shall we call them, this other layer that are run, which has been subsumed by the major labels, which are run very competently by people like that young man in the corner over there, Yuan, where these guys have become very adept. I'd probably say some of the best A&Rs in the country, at least in terms of identifying talent, are sitting in that space because, again, they need to be able to pick up things that I can go now. But oftentimes, they also are very good at picking up gems, which leads me to the next problem that I think exists in the label space. Marketing and promo has evolved, like, I'm not even going to talk about it long ago. 2017, 2018, I would say that your marketing mix still would have a preponderance of, call it 40 to 50% of your spend would necessarily need to be on traditional channels. Today, if you're spending more than 5 to 10%, that would be a lot. And there's an entirely new digital skill set that I think labels have not invested in people to be able to understand. So you literally have these kids trying to figure it out on the fly with an expectant artist that has this big brand. You are Universal, you are Sony, you should know how to do this. And there is no training and development happening for these kids. So as a consequence of that, Yuan finds a Kelvin Momo. Kelvin Momo's expectant, like Yuan does what he does with Kelvin Momo, and it's in phenomenal things. The label, if we had the right skill set sitting there, should be able to pick it up and go, okay, Momo, this is how we could supersize what is you are doing by yourself. But there's no skill set sitting there, the marketing and promo skill set. And now you have these artists that get disillusioned with that, but why am I giving you all these percentages when you are doing nothing that I can't do? You look at piano just from an indexing perspective. These are indies that will shoot the lights out every single time. Just go and see the level of engagement when a Momo album drops. I will wait. Show me a major label drop in the last 3 years that has done anything closely resembling any of those numbers. None. So you have this fundamental lack of investment that labels are making into that very important differentiator. So as a consequence of that, what is the net effect of that? Well, there is no real artist development anymore. Similarly, A&R. What's an A&R these days? That kid is in the culture. He knows what's going on with hip-hop.
Goes to every party. That's the guy.
You know what I mean? That's the guy. He greets everybody. All the piano guys know that guy. That's an A&R in this day and age. That's an A&R.
Is that a good or a bad thing?
It's part of it. But remember, again, when labels had money, there was an A&R talent scout. That is a talent scout. But there was also an A&R administrator. There was also somebody else who was doing all of these other things that is part of the A&R function. And the A&R function really now is about, you know what, shit, you know Kabza? Okay, let's get him in here. You understand? So again, and it's a function of the business model. 1999, physical imploded. Here's an interesting thing. I like how people say the label or music is back in the black. Okay, yes, let's explore that for a second. 1999, the number, as in the nominal figure that money that was being made in the global music industry, that number, I'm not talking, forget inflation, forget anything. The next time we saw that number was in 2015. Now, if you factor in the time value of money, we are still climbing out of the hole that implosion happened. We haven't touched sides at all as a label, as an industry, globally, if you're talking in real money terms. So what does that mean? So major label, I need you to, this thing blows my mind. A major label. Universal's probably got the biggest staff complement, 69 people. 69 people, I think, prior to retrenchments. Probably about 40.
But not anymore.
That's why he said
No.
prior to.
Yeah, but prior to retrenchments, 69 people. This is with a catalog, local alone, which would sit at around 300 packs. How much time do you think any of those people have for one individual? If you've got 300 people who are expectantly waiting for you to release music on an annual basis. Park that. A IT company who is a client of mine, who does design work for a couple banks on apps, has a staff complement of 220. So, again, it's a resource issue. And when are you going to train people? When you're able, when you need to have that many people or that many people serviced as well. So, hard challenges where artists are never going to be able to bridge this chasm with the state of affairs. Like those that break typically are either bypassing this thing and going to labels outside of the country, or alternatively needing to really probably lift more weight than they would need to, in the truest sense of the word, if you had a label infrastructure that was functioning optimally. So those are some of the challenges that I would say are big ones at this particular juncture.
I also think there's also, well, talking to some of the challenges and the staffing complement that you would need in a label, that I think also directly affects the music itself, also comes in from an engineering and songwriting perspective.
Absolutely.
Guys, songwriters exist for a reason because they know how to write songs. Not this rubbish that people are spewing 24/7 on songs and you're just like, uthi manje lona. But this thing is booming and you're like, okay, whatever, we're singing because that's what people are hearing and maybe the beat is really good. But for me, I also think songwriting is also very important. It's affecting the quality of music that we're consuming. And there's nothing wrong with having a songwriter on your team. Drake has got maybe 10 songwriters on one song. That beef battle that he had with Kendrick, it took a while because he needed to go and find all his friends to write all those rebuttals. Do you understand? It's a working system for a reason. And it not being available in an A&R space, because that would fall in that department, correct? And also engineering, I think, is also a very important part as well, because how you hear the music is how you're going to experience it, how you're going to enjoy it. I struggle so much with artists who don't master their songs. You are hurting our ears, Bantu, please. I'll get to a gig, and the DJ before me has redlined the mixer because the song was not mastered. Then when I come with my songs that are mastered, now the engineers, hey, turn it down. Hey, there's a problem here. No, the songs that are engineered properly and mastered properly play properly. But now because you're not mastering it properly, you can't hear it correctly. Those songs sometimes also get uploaded like that on Apple Music. Now you're there in your car and you're trying to turn it up. Why is it sounding so low? Or why can't I hear the song? Now you're redlining your speaker in the car. You change back to radio and then it's a little bit of a problem. So there's very intricate portions that are still missing because there's no access to it. People don't have money to pay engineers. They don't have money to have songwriters. And I think it's also deteriorating the quality of music because if you look at where hip-hop is internationally, a lot of the kids now also kind of writing for themselves because they don't have access to labels. It's created this very depressed emo mode type of music, which the rest of the world is following through. And now we don't have happy songs anymore. People want to feel happy when they're listening to music. People want to enjoy what they're singing along to. I want to be able to dance again. Why do I feel like I need to only just bop my head in the club? That's not fun. Why am I leaving my house? So all those elements also kind of play a part to the music experience over and above the actual mechanic to get it out there.
You're right. I mean, just to add to that, when you're in the States, the first question that they're going to ask you at any office is, who's your engineer? Who's your lawyer? That's it. Like, we don't care about your producers. They're dime a dozen. We can get more songwriters. We can do that. But the engineer and the lawyer, those are the guys who are negotiating. The lawyer's negotiating the deal. Straight up. It's not a manager like your friends who are sitting there saying they're negotiating this deal here. No, chief. It's a lawyer that's doing that. It's a lesson for you.
Don't worry, I'm a lawyer.
The engineer is
Got you.
important. The engineer is important, like Noni says, for the preservation of the sound. Right? Because that's how people are going to enjoy it. Remember, music is a sonic experience. It starts here, it ends here. It's like if you don't have a great ear, the voice doesn't matter. You could have a great voice, but if your ear is terrible, it doesn't mean anything. Right? That's what music is about. And so we need the engineers to speak to that. So I needed to support you on that point because we don't speak about that often enough.
Yeah. Yes. I know, guys, I know we're running over time because, I mean, we have very busy people here. And I'd like to thank you again for taking time out. Just on the last one, in terms of, like, the misconceptions that this word has been thrown around and also romanticized and also sometimes devalued by those that are opposing it. And your take on it, right? Independent artists versus independent label. And I think there's like that gray area in terms of what true independence is. So if I'm signed to an independent label, am I still an independent artist? What constitutes as independent?
Refiloe?
Look, the moment you sign your business to an entity, whether it is an entity with a catalog of 10 artists or an entity with a catalog of 1,000 artists, fundamentally you get into a label deal. And depending on what that label deal is, it's either you'll have some ownership in that IP or not. But fundamentally, there is somebody that is responsible for for the promulgation of your music. So, look,
It's semantics.
yeah,
It's really semantics. I think we're throwing around terms that sound sexy. You know, I remember not wanting to be an artist anymore, right? Starting my own like record label and signing on artists and stuff like that. When you take on that responsibility, you've got to be able to pay for it. And that's really just the bottom line. You know, so you can call yourself an independent artist or an independent label, but if the person who calls themselves an independent label, to Refiloe's point, signs over your art, you're no longer an independent artist, you're an artist signed to a label.
yeah, yes.
You know, so
That's true.
it's semantics
That's true.
really. So whoever's paying for the stuff, that owns the stuff. I mean, it's really that simple.
You know the golden rule, right? I told you about the golden
The
rule.
one with the gold.
Makes the rules. That's it, brother.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
Mureki.
Mureki. So,
This-
yeah,
this-
look, at the end of the Kabelo, like I say, you know, there's horror story. It's the moment you're going to sign, like, you're an artist, you know, an artist signed to a piano hub is as much an artist as an artist signed to Universal.
And they've got a much better chance of success, actually.
Well, transparency.
Okay.
Transparency.
That's where the lawyers come in.
Transparency.
I guess.
Look,
Because it's all of that data that you can get. There's a number of elements that at least there's
But you've also got a one-to-one relationship.
Correct.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But also, it's possible that in independent labels, your MD or your CEO is also your producer. Is
Yeah.
also your A&R. Is also... So there isn't really objectivity as well. You know?
There's no right answer or wrong answer to anything in life.
yeah,
It just
there's
is.
no
yeah.
right way to get to it, because there's also nothing wrong with, you know where you at financially, you know, getting the advice, signing a 3-album deal, riding that deal out, and in a perfect world, you are able to build a brand within those 3 years And on the other side of that, you know, once you're free, you can go do your own thing, but you've used somebody else's money to get you to a certain place.
Okay, I think if I break it down, like, what is the difference between somebody that's signed to an Ambitious Records versus somebody that's signed to a Universal then?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Well, Refiloe makes a good point. Refiloe makes a good point. You can't argue, in a perfect world, you can't argue with the data, the skill set, the experience, the infrastructure that should exist in a major. That can be to your benefit, right? That potentially won't exist in an Ambitious or off the bat. I mean, they can also build up, you know, currency with skill set and, you know, infrastructure, you know, in a perfect world. So, yeah.
Okay. Now, my last one is on now the digital distributor that comes into play, right? Because, I mean, the concept of independence, I mean, is a fascinating one because it's so broad. It requires a lot of hard work. It requires also a lot of building as well, you know? And it would seem that the digital distributors that have come into the ecosystem have made it somewhat easier for the independent artist as well to have the data, have the analytics and things of that nature. Your tune cores, you know, your fives, you know what I mean? So in terms of them coming into play, and if you were to advise an artist, go the digital distributor route, have your independence, or would you advise them to go into the label route where, you know, transparency isn't as forthcoming as on the side of having independence with a digital distributor?
Again, as I said, life doesn't have any clear-cut answers. It depends. The answer is it depends.
It depends on the artist and what the artist wants.
That, very much, exactly that. But I'll give you some scenarios. So if you play in a space where you are in a genre where traditional modes to market still prevail, right? Radio still is important to you. This and that is still important to you. It's going to require capital to be able to get to those places. Do you have the capital? If you do, great. Maybe you can build a team. And if you want to build a team, do you have the expertise to build a team? Because that's another thing. You talked about the barriers to entry being low. There's an assumption that these things can be done. It's one thing to theoretically think you can get your stuff to radio. It's one thing to theoretically think you can promote a release. And it's another thing to be able to actually do it. So do you have the expertise or do you have access to that expertise? It's another important question for you to ask yourself before you make that decision. And that's a local decision. When you now start to play in the space where, let's say, you are an independent and you start to impact in other territories, do you actually have the networks of people to be able to make a hit in Nigeria? Do you actually have the resource or the capability to be able to promulgate a hit in the US where different tiers of radio will cost you thousands upon thousands of dollars to be able to build? So there are spaces and places. I am not a label basher, not by any stretch of the imagination. I respect many of my compatriots that work in that space. I also respect those that choose to forge another path. The path you choose to forge, just equip yourself with knowledge. That's the only thing I ask, right? Because there's too many conversations I often have where you can clearly hear that this person doesn't even understand how to leverage the universe of rights that exist on the master side or on the publishing side. You don't even know the rules before you can break the rules. So how about starting with understanding what the rules are and then making a call? How about taking the time to understand an ecosystem before you actually then decide that actually, you know what, all of these idiots for the last 100 years that have been making recorded music don't know anything about anything and I'm going to do it differently. Right? It's just a common sense thing. If I was to ask you tomorrow, here's a Porsche, go drive it, you're going to learn how to drive the car. So all I ask of anybody who's going to go into this space is take the time. There are books upon books. There are people you can touch on. There are many ways that you can teach yourself at least a little something before you make an informed decision. So that conversation there, like I say, is so situation specific that I am not going to sit here and tell somebody stuff labels, don't do a label. No, that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you that you need to be very honest with yourself and your situation about what you need and make a call based on that.
And I think just to your point as well, to echo, last part that I'm going to say is that there's the music business, which is what we're in, where we are, and what we're trying to be successful in. And then there's the business of music, which is what Refiloe is speaking about, the understanding of the model, what we call looking under the hood, you know? But over and above that, it's an understanding of business, period. All these things are the same. Whether you're selling smoothies at a spaza shop or you are selling albums through Spotify, it's the same principle. It's a trade, right? And we need to understand that. Musicians love to look at their music like it's special, like, oh my goodness, like it's so close to my heart. I tell everybody all the time, anyone can sing. I'll give you the right amount of time, the right vocal coach, you will come out of there sounding like Beyonce. Anyone, like a hit is a science. It's not like you are lucky or this happened. A hit is a science. That's why there's guys like David Foster, people like JR. It's a science, right? You apply a science to it. This is the formula, and this is what we get out. It's really like that. It's not, and I'm just trying to show it like how easy it is, right? That it all comes with understanding, the knowledgeability, equipping yourself with the knowledge and learning those things and having the ability to say like, this is how I'm gonna write my records. And that's why like Bokabza, Libo Mang, Libo Momo, Libo Mang, they'll continuously have those hits because it's a science. They've got a way that they do it. They know at 2 minutes, 53 seconds, I'm ramping up. I'm going down on the EQs because the ears are tired. I'm ramping up on the bass. I just want to hit them with the scoop. They know it. They've done it. It's tried and tested. So we need to have that. I just wanted to echo your point, my brother, which is very, very true.
I also think whether you're choosing to go independent or whether with a label, the reason why I said it depends on what the artist wants. It also depends on how far you want to take this thing. Some people just want to make music and sit at home. Other people want to be global superstars, right? And I think we also need to look at the fact that we're in a different time now, right? What major labels give you is access. You're honestly going to Universal because you're saying, I don't have money. I don't know the people in the States or in the UK or in Australia. You have those people. Plug me with those people. Because I can't get to them with what I have. And now we're sitting in a position where the artists are saying, okay, but I've got 5 million followers on TikTok. Everybody loves my dance. That's fine. You've got your foot through the door where you can actually, okay, people recognize you. But the maintaining of the relationship to get you much further is where the business now comes in because you don't have the business skills to sign the right contracts, to get you on certain stages, to get you to perform at Coachella, at Wireless Festival, to go to the Grammys or whatever the case may be. That's the business behind it, which major labels can somewhat give you that your boy from Katlehong doesn't necessarily have.
But at the digital distributors, not the boy from Katlehong.
And again, just to echo this point, that there is no right or wrong way.
Yeah.
Uncle Waffles was at Wireless Festival, and it's 2 kids, Zeus and Kai.
Yes.
But you know what it is about those kids that impresses me every time I sit with Zeus and Kai? Is how those kids are students.
Yes.
Those kids are students.
Yes.
Right? Like those kids are sucking up knowledge and they're learning all the time. And that's why they're as good as they are at what they do. Just take the time to know. I think in this age, especially in social media, like every time I switch on like one of these platforms, there's somebody with a nothingness expounded so verbosely, right?
Hey, Refiloe using big English. And it's after 5.
We're in the age where if you say it loudly and enough with your chest, we'll assume you know what you're talking about.
This is true.
But the reality is, those that are really going to push the envelope are those that are actually going to take the time to understand that, okay, I'm burning the ships, as my good pastor said to me on Tuesday. I'm burning the ships. I'm leaving them there. And I'm going forward, and I need to know how it is I'm going to take this next step forward. Because if I don't know how to do that, well, then I might as well lay down and become a meal for the lions, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's true. Well, when you're saying that they're students, I was basically speaking to the fact that they're students of the business. And they've now learned the business to then take Waffles to where she needs to be. Because in and as much as, I mean, there's always this argument about, Waffles is where she is because she's the star. She is the star, but she's the star with the business. They work together. If Waffles was, she would be a star just in South Africa if Kai and Zeus went the business to get her to where she needs to be.
Yeah. Look, I just also want to hear the independent story also, given that shine, because there are those success stories like a Waffles. There are those success stories like Musa Keys, you know what I mean? With what T-Effect has also done, you know? But it's just also good to hear both sides in terms of what majors can do, but also not excluding rather what the indie people can do if they are true students, you know what I mean? Because there are those glory stories, and if you do take time to learn about them, you could see that there's another path to success. You know what I mean? I'm going to ask for a bit more of your time for the guys in the crowd if they want to ask 2 to 3 questions. And I see Tuli in the front and my lady here. So these 2 questions in the front for our amazing panelists. Oh, 3.
Ish, bana bayo skolong, go son.
Yeah.
Who was the other person? Who was the other person who had a question?
Sanborani, Nonke, hello, Dumela. Hope you guys are well. First of all, thank you guys for your time. Obviously, sharing the knowledge is always key. Just a quick one. We're finding ourselves, you know, for me, coming from an era where you had a Keenan Forbes saying that they don't play your music on radio because it doesn't bang, you know. And you had to learn those relationships as far as compilers, et cetera, are concerned. We're now in a space where if you're dropping a single and you're taking it either to radio or TV, and I've had this from a personal experience, the first thing they ask is, does your song have a challenge? I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean? What does it have to do with the music? And a big part for me that I feel like is being neglected is people who have social capital to get into these roles that are either brand-orientated or compiler-orientated or even A&R orientated, but they don't have the mental capacity to find good and listen to good music. So how do you guys, as people who are stalwarts or younger stalwarts or whatever the case is, you know, who have this knowledge, how do you guys take on the responsibility of trying to change the climate, because the quality of music is low? We keep trying to blame the artists as well, but they're actually people who are in these positions that can make the changes that aren't doing their jobs. You know, brand managers are becoming influencers. TV personalities are becoming DJs. And there's nothing wrong with it also, not disrespect, nothing wrong with it. But you're finding the fiber and the quality of our industry, personally, from my view, you know, going down as opposed to coming up with the influence of the internet age. And I feel like, you know, we aren't taking enough responsibility in making the right people do the right jobs so that they're not relying on the internet for the job to do it for them. So yeah, if you guys are taking up that role, how do you guys do it? Yeah.
I would say stop moaning about it and get it done. You know, because this is just how the cookie crumbles, right? You are if this is how people are consuming music, you've got to ask yourself the question, are you kind of, you know, presenting your music where people are consuming music? And is the product actually, like, up to scratch? You know, because I think, like Jay said, we get too married to our music. You know what I'm saying? And if there is a compiler that you're having an issue with, who wants challenges, whatever, there's 6 million compilers. Like, there's many avenues. I'm of the conviction that, you know what, if this door's not going to open, I'm going to kick another one down. Because I want this thing. That's what I always, whenever people come up to, I'm asking petit demo, Nyenzani, whatever. And I'm like, do you want this thing? Okay? Because that's the bottom line. Joyce Meyer says life is all about how big your 1-2 is. If you want to do it, you'll do it. Because all of these things have always been there. We've been there with people not wanting to play our music, but it's like, okay, cool. Like, I'm going to keep on doing. There's people who open the door. There's people go through those doors. Keep on showing up. Keep on doing what you need to do.
And I think what I'll say to you is I wish I could tell you that somebody saved us or saved the person who came before us. Yeah. It's just not going to happen. Right? The reality is that, to his point, it's going to be about asking yourself the question, am I playing the game with the rules that are applicable to today? Because to lament and to say, I wish it was like, it's never gonna be like that again. So you need to appreciate that what you need to focus on is, so how do I bend the environment, or how do I use the elements of the environment today? How am I using short form content, for example, to be able to get a message? How are you taking a page out of people like Nomuzi, who are incredible content creators? How are you learning from people like that in terms of how to play the game today for attention? That's what I think is a lot more of a productive time. Use of your time is to figure out how to use the resources you have available to you today. Because it is what it is, mate. The internet age, tomorrow there'll be the virtual reality age, and after that there'll be something else. But I can assure you, somebody's gonna sit in a chair like this 30 years from now and ask exactly the same question. And the difference between those that did something and those that didn't is they figured it out.
Hello, thank you so much for your guys' time. I have direct questions. Sorry. So the first one is the high frequency of releases that we see happening going to wear out artists, but also lead to artists that don't actually reach pinnacles, but are actually a whole lot of mediocre artists with a whole lot of songs going out? And it kind of speaks to that quality control that you were speaking on. So it's mostly for Cosmo and JR. And for Refiloe as well as Kabelo, being in the major environment, right? We are told that you need to create music in English. I'm not gonna mention which major. And we see Tyler sort of taking Amapiano, making it palatable for the American market, right? So do we keep fighting for our music to be in our languages and just push until it goes out, regardless of what they say to us, that big international offices? Or do we fold, go English, but we don't speak to our actual market anymore? Georgia?
Like I say, Refiloe said something very valid a couple of minutes ago. He said, it's either you're going to be in the song game or you're going to be in the artist game, right? We're currently in the song game. That's where we are. The industry is in the song industry. And hence, we can get people who saying, does your song have a dance challenge? Because TikTok has become the biggest music discovery tool in the world, right? So it goes without saying that when you want to discover new music, you go to TikTok. That's it, plain and simple. So therefore, there will be those things that come around. So will we have great artists? I don't know. I don't know if we'll see another era of great artistry from songwriting perspective. I just don't know. Or whether or not music will become escapism, right? Like piano is. Piano is the biggest form of escapism. And that's why if I'm at home, not feeling too good, whatever, I can go to Makube Njalo, zakhala, kube mnandi, and go back home to my normal life, right? Because for those 3 hours where I'm away, I'm in another space. I've forgotten. And that's why piano became such a big genre for the youth. It's because it came in during COVID, where the economy was at the lowest of the low. There was no money. People were not making anything. And it became a form of escapism. It could allow us as young people to say, I'm not happy with where I am, but when I'm listening to this, you know what I'm saying? And then we have to go back to that. So it's synonymous with that. So I don't know if we'll ever see that. I think we are in a song era. That's where we're stuck. High frequency of release is going to be there for a very long time because we're creating shorter songs with high replay value because we're trying to up the algorithm on the stream part. So will we see another era of like great big records that are going to take over the world like in a big way, like Adele, Hello, and all of those things, Beyonce, Halo, and those? I'm not too sure. At this stage, I can't really tell. But we need to embrace where we are and swim in this Red Sea of 359,000 songs a day.
So the fundamentals will always be there. You know, that's a beautiful thing about principles. Principles have always been there. They are here now. They are going to be here long after we're gone. All right? So to your Tyler question and the Zulu or whatever African language you want to speak, whatever, I don't think Tyler set out to say, I'm going to sing in English because it is the in thing or whatever. Like, I don't think she can speak an African language. Do you understand what I'm saying? So she made music in partnership with songwriters maybe and whatever else. So the fundamental is this. Are you a songwriter or are you a singer? Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. So if you were, whoever of you are there that are songwriters and singers, go make music. Yes, there's a picture being painted here with so many variables that you've got to deal with. But whether we are in a track economy or an artist economy, whatever, it's like, go make the music. That's the first step. And more often than not, when you're true to where you're at and you make music beautifully, skillfully, because there's also the skill part. You actually have to be quite good, right? And then when you're good, it resonates. Let's start on with the bread and butter issues first. Don't get caught up with you just have to be worried about the first step. Let me go into studio and make beautiful music. And then, then you start dealing with all the rules that come with, how is music being consumed? You'll deal with those things, But from an English and vernac perspective, I don't think it's a non-starter.
I also think, speaking to the question that you had asked, music right now is also just moving at such a rapid pace where it's like, okay, how are we keeping up? How are we keeping up? As human beings, we are born to adapt. Times have changed throughout where music was made initially, where you had to play a live instrument first to record the song, get it onto a vinyl before it moved over to CDs rather, and then moved over to digital files where we're at now. Things are obviously moving faster because the internet is moving faster, but we will adapt. So it's about artists adapting to where the technology is right now to serve you as an artist. But yes, Kabelo's right. It's about the skill set and going home and then saying, okay, let me make really dope music. But another thing that also holds artists back is holding on to the music. You guys are sitting with 10,000 songs on your computer and nobody's listening to them. Sometimes you also just need to release and see, obviously have a team first to kind of simmer through the music. Okay, that one doesn't work, this one works, that one's not the one. But release the music, and if it doesn't pop off, then go to the next single. I think people are also sometimes they're too precious about, but this is the one I envisioned to be the one. Maybe it was the one for you in your heart, but the rest of the country is not feeling like that. So I think we need to also just stick with the times and release. Apparently, and I could be corrected at this, but apparently the rate of release is also at every 8 weeks. If you're not releasing a song every 8 weeks, we're going to forget about you. Keep it moving.
On to the question around coming back to the question that Kabelo also answered. Okay, talking at it with kind of label parlance, right? The question of English versus non-English is an interesting one when you consider that I think it was Warner talked, I think it was about 6 months ago, I think, when I read this, where they were talking about the percentage contribution of their global superstars, so their top 5 artists, to revenue had declined. Remind me, it's down to 5% right now From 15%, I think it's down to 5% overall contribution, correct? Am I correct, Johan?
Refiloe, the panel is here.
Okay, no, that's fine. So apparently it's down to about 5%. So if your top 5 are doing that, what are the insights that you're gleaning from that? And what is actually happening? When you look at percentage chart share in territories, you're increasingly looking, or like there's a greater amount of local content that is actually filling up the kind of top 100, top 200, top 500 from a chart and revenue perspective in each of these territories. So what is it telling you? It's telling you that more and more people in your regional areas are consuming music, one. They are subscribing and leaning into these platforms, two. So you've got a bigger audience than just South Africa. So a good starting point is, okay, international label, how do I build Africa out? And once I've built Africa out and I've been able to triangulate an audience that possibly also not only consumes amapiano, but also consumes Afrobeat, which now is north of 1 billion streams a year, how do I build that out? So it's incremental, I'd say would be the approach, right? Build different tribes, build different communities. And the reality of the matter is that courtesy of these streaming platforms, the fact that there's 1 billion people streaming, both you and I know that there aren't enough subscriptions on the continent to be able to have the numbers of people streaming Afrobeats. That means that there are communities and tribes of people who are leaning in to other things. And that means that you can be as authentic as you want to be, and there are people who are likely going to seek your music out. So the simple answer, which has always been the simple answer, is stick to your guns, right? Yes, keep them happy with whatever else they'll do, but stick to your guns with the artists that you truly believe in. I remember having those conversations in the office, ask them, they thought I was nuts. There was a kid who did not make commercial rap music by the name of Maclera, and I was like, there's this kid. You guys don't know it yet, but this is the kid. And that kid, what I love about Maclera is Maclera has been Maclera, and Maclera continues to be Maclera. And he is continuously boxing above his weight, you know. Disciple from day one. And I was clear about the fact that no one in this label is going to tell this kid how to make his music. So that is the space you need to hold for the artists that you believe in when you're sitting in a label as well.
Big truth.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your insights. I have a question. So, of course, we've established that, you know, the assets are created in the studio. So I have a question on studio etiquette and just basic studio culture. And I specifically want to ask you, as the male veterans, how do we change the studio culture to make it more inclusive, specifically for women? Because the spaces are often very male exclusive. And there was a funny reel that I actually saw a few days ago. I think it was with you, Kabelo, and Casper, and you guys were making a joke about having cheese platters, for example, like in a studio, an upgrade. But the reality is the culture is so important and is such an impact, you know, to female writers who are up and coming, trying to get noticed. How do we make the space comfortable for an up-and-coming female girl who's coming into a studio? It's full of Hennessy. You know, they don't know how to have a voice to question if there is a split sheet, what are the rights, you know, to the song, where they'll probably be the top liner or write the entire, you know, track at the mercy of a very well-known producer. What do you think would be your advice from the receiving end of the creator to the one that actually owns the studio or facilitates the studio? what do you think your advice is, for the new cats today to make that environment conducive for everyone?
I think, Kabelo, you're the best person because you've been...
No,
studio
look, I think I touched on it. It's a very good question. I mean, a battle that has been waged for decades and has not been won, and we're failing dismally from a representation, from a woman perspective. I spoke about disciplines and that were learned during the analog age, split sheets and all of those disciplines that go with, I believe, that went with that era. And a lot of those disciplines are lost. How to win them back, I can't sit here and say I have the answer. However, I think from a female perspective, it's about, not going at it alone, right? Having a team or a person who then becomes, your touch point when dealing with these things. Like any industry, you need hair on your teeth. This is not a skip through the daisies and the tulips, right? This is a dog eat dog everywhere. So you do need a certain hair on your teethness about you, to get stuff done. But don't go at it alone. I think there are a number of gentlemen, in the business that you can count on to help you wage these battles,
Yeah, and it's an ecosystem issue. It's a simple business issue. More than 50% of people in this country are female. It's good business to have people who look like your target audience, servicing your target audience. And that was something I was always particularly clear upon. And one thing I can pride myself on is when I worked in these music spaces, I went out of my way to build largely female teams. And in building those largely female teams, the one layer which was always a challenge, which worried me as a guy, was the promo layer. Because what the promo layer meant is I needed to send a often very attractive young lady out into a space where, let's just say that the gender norms were crap, quite frankly, right? Let's call a spade a spade. And what I would tend to do, especially like in the first kind of couple of months of those people working, is despite me being 3 or 4 layers more senior than them, I'd actually get on the road to go to radio, to compilers with them and say, if you're talking to this person, you're talking to me. So hold that space and remind yourself that if we're going to have challenges, the challenge you're going to have is the challenge you're going to have with me and not with this lady here, because she's here to do a job and she's not here now to tick some box of some fantasy that you might have, right? So it becomes important that those that can create those safe spaces for women create those safe spaces as well. So to those that are in the business that have female reports, understand that they have challenges that you might not have, and you need to be able to protect and keep a safe space for them as well.